Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Exclusive with Mpoki Thompson here on the Citizen Digital. Today, I'm at KPMG. The focus of this conversation is very pivotal to Tanzania's development. On June 11, the Finance Ministry is going to formally present in Parliament the budget for the 2026-2027. And the discussion today is we're going to look at the challenges, the opportunities, but what are the implications as Tanzania prepares for development in the next fiscal year. With me, I have the honor of hosting Fabiola, Sebuyoya, and Samwel Esupu. These are tax partners at KPMG. They're the experts in this field. They're going to expound, provide context, and we will delve into the details. So welcome to the Citizen Digital.
Thank you.
Okay. Whenever it's a period of June, there's that fever about how Tanzania is preparing to implement its development strategy for the fiscal year that is prospective. And today we want to focus on that. What does this mean to a common Tanzanian, to the private sector, and the investors here in Tanzania? So let's now begin at looking at the implications. What should be the main focus area for Tanzanians to know as the government prepares to present the formal budget estimate?
So quite a number of things that we'll be looking at in terms of changes in the policies, changes in the framework, and the areas that the government is going to look at in terms of revenue collection. We are aware that the government is looking to finance most of its budget internally, and we're expecting about 74% to come from internal funding. So that gives you a very little room when it comes to your financial aid or aid from outside. So that means now the government needs to look at in terms of what revenue sources they're going to add, what sort of incentives they're going to give investors to be able to come to Tanzania to invest more and be able to expand the economy. So that's how I'm looking at it in terms of expected quite a number of changes, from a regulatory framework, from incentives point of view, and tax changes. So that's what I'm looking for, and I'm trying to see definitely what is going to change. We have seen quite a number of changes happening in the past. What is going to happen? That is what we're expecting to see in the coming budget next week.
Yeah, as you mentioned, 74% of the budget revenue is going to be collected domestically. Now, this has very high implications. You know, when you ask a common Tanzanian what that means, they might think that there's going to be more levies and taxes that are going to be implemented. And around 15.5 trillion is going to come from borrowing. And out of that, there is domestic borrowing, but there are also concessional loans. Can you talk about now the 74%? When we talk about the majority of the government expenditure for a financial year is going to be generated domestically, what does that truly mean to a business person, to a common Tanzanian?
So that definitely means is that the sources from the government, whether it's tax or non-tax revenue, has to be about 74%. And that means is that the government is going to look at sources to be able to more or less increase the percentage in terms of the collections they're going to be getting from those revenue sources. So there might be different ways of looking at it. One might be increasing the tax base, but that does not necessarily means increasing your that necessarily means in terms of increasing your number of taxpayers in your tax pool. That is one of the ways you can look at it. The other ways might be in terms of providing incentives such that we can have more investors coming through, and this can be targeted. It can be in terms of reduced tariffs, can be in terms of giving tax breaks, can be in terms of giving reduced tariffs. And what we'll see is that you can have more investors coming in that can invest more. So we have seen in the past, for instance, there have been, in terms of broadening the tax base, introduce new tax regimes, the digital service tax, that is one of them. Last year, we have seen an reintroduction of withholding tax on small-scale miners, that is one of them. But in the past, again, in terms of increasing investments, in terms of increasing people coming to the market, we have seen the government giving breaks, reduced tax rates in terms of assembly plants, so for example. So those are the things we expect probably to come through in terms of how now we can get in additional funding from investment, at the same time widening our tax base from other sectors as well. So that is probably can stop at that point.
Yeah, and I want us to linger a little bit there. And Fabiola, you also chime in a bit, because when we talk about broadening the tax base or whether increasing the taxes that are imposed on some of the multinationals here in Tanzania, that becomes quite a contrasting issue. Where you mentioned about about the digital levies, which created quite a friction. As a Tanzanian, if I am charged when I use my mobile money transactions, and that levy, the government says is going to be forwarded in development projects, it definitely is going to impact my financial capacity. Now, the two main options: broadening the tax base, meaning that maybe even in the informal sector also needs to be taxed, because we have a wide informal sector in Tanzania that does not really pay up to its tax capacity. What does that mean if we are to broaden the tax base? How many Tanzanians are going to be impacted? Or the multinational, from that perspective, should there be more levies, more taxes that are imposed on the multinationals?
All right. Thank you, Mpoki. So I think to build on what Sam has said, probably increasing the tax rates is the easiest option. Like you've said, you increase the tax, say, on telco products. Maybe it's easy to collect, but I think, as you've put it, perhaps considering other options, such as encouraging the small and medium-sized enterprises to come into the tax net and comply voluntarily, that may serve the purpose of widening the tax base. Because at the moment, about 90% or above is the SMEs businesses in Tanzania. But when you look at the tax collections, for instance, only 20% of the tax collections in the country come from the SMEs, despite the majority of them, despite a lot of businesses in numbers coming from SMEs. So perhaps in encouraging the SMEs to comply and then widen the tax base and consider other areas where we can reduce the tax a little bit to ease the burden on the individual. One of them options could be to simplify registration and compliance requirements for the SMEs. That will encourage them to say, okay, we are happy to comply, provided that there is no costs, a lot of costs in compliance. So the other thing could be perhaps announcing a tax amnesty program or a regulatory amnesty program to say, if you comply today and say in the next 6 months or a year, we're going to waive all the penalties or interest that have accumulated as a result of non-compliance. Once they comply, then it's easy to take them through compliance going forward. Because there's a lot of potential, like I've said, in that sector. But how do we help them be compliant? Eventually, if they're compliant, they get access to different things such as funding, insurance, and even access to technology. So eventually they will grow and contribute more to the economy and to the tax collections.
Okay, and you mentioned about the tax amnesty. We're looking at an economy, the Tanzania generally, because the budget that was proposed is 62.3 trillion. That is a 10% increase from the fiscal year 2025-2026. And out of that, 36 point something trillion from domestic revenue, and then 15.5 from borrowing. Now, when we look at the amnesty or the tax breaks, people might be wondering, how can Tanzania absorb that? Is our economy strong enough to absorb any tax amnesty? Because it has been quite a contentious issue that has been discussed even in parliament. And you've mentioned that. Do you think that is a policy that is appealing enough for investors?
Okay, so it depends on how you look at it, but in the short run, there will be some reduction, or we'll have to forego something in terms of the interest or penalties. But then in the long run, you have brought all these businesses within the tax net, of which if they become compliant, then they'll continue to pay taxes.
Okay. That's quite interesting. And what sectors of the economy do you think will be the key drivers in 2026, 2027? The government has already laid out its strategies during the parliamentary presentations from different ministries. We've seen there's a lot of focus on mega infrastructure projects. The Works Ministry is now even looking at introducing an infrastructure bond to support some of the mega projects that Tanzania has been implementing for quite a while. What remain the major sectors that are going to be key drivers?
Okay, so for the sectors that we believe probably would benefit from targeted reform and consideration, one of them is the telco sector. by virtue of its nature and the interaction with the majority of the society on a day-to-day basis. But I think also towards the promotion of technology advancement and financial inclusion, because the telco sector plays such a key role on that. Some of the challenges we have seen in the sector is really around excise duty, a consumption tax called excise duty, and its imposition on business-to-business transactions. So originally, this tax was really imposed to discourage consumption of certain products. Of course, to widen the tax base, it has historically been imposed on services, and now it's on most of telcos products. So we have seen it being imposed on business to business, whereas the intention is to be business to consumption, which then results in double taxation of the same telco products. That's one of the areas one of the sectors we believe could benefit from targeted fiscal reforms. The second one is on mining. The mining sector still faces some challenges in terms of deductibility of certain expenses, such as the CSR costs, which are mandatory for them to provide in the areas where they operate, and also the deductibility of the royalty that they pay to the government when it comes to corporate income tax. The other sector is around hospitality and tourism. It's one of the key sectors in the country and contributes quite largely to the economy. But we see challenges in terms of the suppliers or service providers being required to make an upfront payment of VAT, for instance, before even rendering the services that they provide. So I think those are among the key sectors that could benefit from certain reforms in the budget.
Absolutely. And you've also mentioned about double taxation. This has been a perennial challenge here in Tanzania, where we have the central government and then also the local government imposing different taxes into the budget of not only investors, but even a common mwananchi. What is your advice to the government? And I would like to hear views from the both of you. When it comes to double taxation, this has been an issue for so long. And even the Tax Reform Commission, they mentioned about where the government needs to focus on when it comes to reforming the taxation policies here in Tanzania. What are your views on that?
So I think probably from where I'm sitting, just to have in terms of a review in terms of what are these specific taxes, because when you talk about taxation, you're talking about might be direct taxes administered by the tax authority and taxes that are coming directly from levies and charges from the local governments. So you might be having charges in terms of licensing when you're operating. You also have charges coming from the municipals charging you in terms of where you're sitting. You've paid your business license, but you're also paying to be in that municipality. So you see that becomes more or less two charges at one on your business. But again, you can look at it differently in terms of there are compulsory taxes that you need to pay based on your profits, on your employees. Those will still remain. But in terms of what are these other taxes that we can get away from, I think there should be a review in terms of what are the specifics that we are looking at, which is specific sector as specific taxes that we are looking at. You will find in terms of whether, for instance, you're in hospitality industry, you have your own set of taxes. Where in agriculture, you have your own set of taxes. When in mining, you have your own set of taxes. So definitely we need to have a review in terms of what are these specific taxes that we are saying are double taxed and how can we get away from them. One of the challenges that we'll have is that there is always a risk in terms of one losing the revenue, whether it's the central government or the local government. And I think there should be a trade-off in terms of what do we want as a government together so that we can say we are assisting our investors, we are assisting our taxpayers to be able to accommodate and pay the taxes that they're supposed to be paying, depending in terms of the area of operation, the sector, and the nature of the business. So I think that's something that needs to be done in terms of review. But again, you cannot scrap it in the short term. Definitely, you need to have a compulsory review to say if we are getting away or we're trading off certain taxes, what will be the representative to be able to now, what should be the trade-off, to put it differently, in terms of what should we now tax or what should we now collect to be able to recover? Or if you're scrapping some of these particular taxes, where should be the next revenue collection point? I think that's now the trade-off the government needs to look at in terms of review, whether it's local government or the central government in terms of these collections.
Okay, now let's look at the overall economic growth projections. This year projected at around above 6%, which is one of the highest not only in Africa, but globally. And currently we're looking at a debt to GDP ratio that's close to or above 50 billion. So that's 48 to 50% of the GDP. Inflation, relative 3 to 5%. Now, when you come to me as a Tanzanian and I'm looking at all these numbers and I'm looking at inflation that is said to remain stable, what am I supposed to really focus on when I'm listening to the budget speech? Because there are those taxation that are going to be proposed by the finance ministry that are going to impact someone's purchasing power, that are going to impact even income household. What are those areas that Tanzanians should really be keen on?
If you're talking to me as a local Tanzanian, let's say as an employee, definitely I'll be looking at in terms of what goes to my pocket, what is my disposable income. So definitely I'll be looking at in terms of is my pay as you earn going to change so that I can have additional disposable income. I think the challenge we've been seeing is that due to the geopolitics tensions that we've been having, fuel prices have been rising. Now, what does that mean? Transportation cost has risen, production cost has risen, everything has risen. So for me now, I still have the same disposable income. And again, the costs are piling up, the prices are going up, but the level of income in my pocket is still the same. So definitely I'll be looking at from a pay-as-you-earn perspective, will that change? Secondly, I can look at on consumption taxes, excise duty and VAT. As an individual, I don't have a chance to be able to reclaim the costs in terms of whether I pay for a VAT, that is my cost, that's my sunk cost. Will they reduce the tax rates? Not sure. Something to look out for. Excise duty, quite a number of transactions has. Your mobile money have your drinks, water, bottled water, your juices, your sodas, your beers, your spirits, all these have these duties. Are they going to be reduced so that I can be able to purchase? I think that's something to look at. So quite a bit of number of things. Again, from tariffs in terms of importation, again, we pay quite a number of taxes when we import things in Tanzania. Are there going to be changes there? If no changes, what does that mean? So definitely my purchasing capacity will depend in terms of the policy that the government is going to put into place. How much am I going to have as my disposable income? Are they going to affect me directly or are they going to affect me indirectly? That will depend in terms of the specific changes that will come through. But if you reduce on the cost of goods side, definitely, as much as I'll still have the same disposable income, definitely I'll be able to purchase more. If you reduce my pay as well, again, same thing. I'll have more disposable income, but the cost will rise, but I'll still be able to pay. So you'll see now, for instance, your transport, your local dollars, the cost is going up. What does that mean to a local Tanzania? The cost is going, my income is the same, the products are going, the production costs are going up. What does that mean to me? We're using fuel to produce in factories, in industries, we're doing that in construction. What does that mean? Definitely a high tax. So definitely look at in terms of tariffs, consumption tax. If they reduce, then definitely we should be able to see. So those are the things probably to look out for as a common mwananchi, if I put it that way, in terms of how that is going to affect my pocket at the end of the day.
Okay, so I want us now to look at comparatively the tax policies within East Africa. From a Tanzanian perspective, how do they compare to neighboring countries, particularly in attracting investors?
I think looking at it from a Tanzanian perspective across the region, I think more or less we have similar rules in terms of whether it's a corporate tax, your pay-related taxes are more or less the same. But I think we do have certain areas where we're giving certain incentives. And even from a Tanzanian perspective, I think we do have certain incentives specific to certain sectors. So if you go to tourism, if you go to mining, if you go to your manufacturing entity, if you go to your plant assembly entities, they have their own specific incentives. So if you look at broadly from an East African perspective, I think we'll say more or less we're in the similar tax region. We have the same custom territory, the East African community. We have more or less the same in terms of corporate tax rates. But I think the only thing that we have different is the breaks. So if you go to invest in Rwanda, you have a one-stop center where you can do everything in one point. It becomes easier for an investor to go there. It becomes easier for them to get incentives. But for Tanzania as well, TCS is doing quite a good job in terms of promoting the country. ZIPA does the similar thing in Zanzibar, promoting the country in terms of what are the specific incentives it can give you the moment you come to Tanzania. So what you'll see, for instance, the incentives around exemptions from payment of withholding tax for investors. You do have that exemption. If you're investing in a specific industry, you have exemption. You are given less tax rates. For instance, if you're doing plant assembly for tractors, vehicles, and all that, you're given less tax rate for about 10 years. And again, you have around incentives from VAT, for instance, on importation for capital goods, where you can defer and you can be able to come and set up a plant. So those are sort of incentives you see. Yes, they have their incentives, but I think we also have, in terms of the country, the specifics that we can say. Tanzania also have specific incentives that can give investors room to come to be able to trade in the country.
Okay, and other than the differences that are now quite inherent in these key economies within the region, because the East African bloc has for quite some time now been the continent's leading economic development bloc, how can we now ensure that there is that collective or harmonization of some of these policies for us to have a collective purchasing power, not only in Africa, but even globally? Because at the moment, you find that Kenya interacts with the European Union as Kenya. You find that Uganda does the same and Tanzania does the same as separate countries. But for those collective initiations that can benefit the region, what is your view about the integration of our tax policies, and perhaps moving forward, how can they be beneficial to all the countries within the region?
I think from where I'm sitting, I do know there is quite a bit of integration between the ministers of finance across East Africa, but I think probably the only thing that I don't have visibility probably might be the implementation. Because I do know the ministers normally sit in advance before they give out their budgets for each of the countries. And again, even if you see we are reading the budget on the same day, that is harmonization in terms of what we're expecting to do. And what we'll find, probably the main point that we've been implementing across the region is on customs. That has been effective. Now, in terms of whether now we want to have a common block, that will depend in terms of do we want to have the same tax rates? Do we want to have the same policies? But again, we are in different levels or stages of economy. But I think that might be a challenge in terms of integration. We have seen the European Union doing that. Is that something that we can see as a concept that we can do as Africa? Or is East Africa? That's something that we will need to look at. We had at some point intending to have one currency across Africa, but I think that never materialized. So it's something that we can try to see. We have those policies. I think something has already been done on that space, but in terms of the implementation, I think that's where the gap is.
Okay, and as you interact with the private sector, because KPMG as an advisory firm, you interact with different private sector companies here in Tanzania, both domestic and international. What are the pressing matters as far as any fiscal budget is concerned, but also the tax policy? When you talk to these private sectors, what do they tell you about that?
Okay, so I think first and foremost, they really look into having a pro-investment fiscal policy, so the policy that recognizes the level of investment that has been made, but also promotes the growth of the investments that have been made in the country. And that really translates or results from the tax administration system that we have. We have seen the government is embracing technology, which I think is a good thing, but there are still some hurdles in terms of how the tax is being administered. For instance, there are certain requirements for you to make an objection against a tax assessment. There are also challenges in terms of whether the system that we have adopted, the tax administration system, speaks to what the law provides. So we've seen some variances in terms of what the system requires against what is already in the law. Ideally, the two should speak to each other. The other challenge we've seen, and perhaps to your point earlier, is around the implementation of the double tax agreements that the country has entered into with other countries. So there are some varying interpretations as to whether the relief under those agreements is available and where it should be enjoyed, whether in Tanzania or in the other jurisdiction, which effectively may sometimes result into the double taxation, the problem for which we were trying to avoid.
I think the other challenge you're seeing is in terms of the rules. they want certainty in terms of what point in time the rules and the regulation are going to change. You don't want to invest today when your tax rate is 30%, then come next year 40%. I think that is something that they're looking for in terms of are we certain we're going to be having the same set of rules for the upcoming future so that we can invest and invest and invest more. I think that is something that it has been coming, and in most cases they'll ask you, am I certain that there were not going to be changes? We say no, we definitely have changes single year, but we don't have erratic changes that can definitely be very different from what the norm is. But again, I think that is something that they look at it differently. And one of the other things they'll normally look at is that is our investment secure? When we're investing in the country, is the investment secure? And most likely that's where TSES and ZIPA comes in terms of security of your investment. You have these authorities that are looking at these. You can always have a discussion with these specific authorities, and they can be able to guide you in terms of your investment securities. If you have challenges from your investment, where to go about and how to go about it.
Okay, so Tanzania is roughly $100 billion economy and the 12th largest in Africa. And we used to be the second largest in the region, but we are now the third largest. DRC is the second largest economy within the East African bloc. The government has a development vision 2050 target of 1 trillion GDP. That is just a few years away. We're in 2026, we are less than 100 billion. What do you think needs to be the government's focus whenever they're implementing any annual budget in trying to reach that Herculean number of 1 trillion by 2050?
Okay, so I think to build on to the earlier point as well, really, if we are to achieve that target, we need to create an environment where somebody can sit somewhere there in the world and say, I'm going to make a long-term investment decision in Tanzania. Eventually, those businesses will translate into the growth of the economy, but that will only come if we sufficiently engage the interested parties or the key stakeholders in the process of, say, policy formulation. Before the rules come out, have we engaged all those that are being affected by that rule to hear what they'll say? If we're introducing a certain tax, what will that mean to all the way up to the ordinary citizen of the country? What will it mean to employment opportunities? Are we levying too many taxes, say, on employers, and therefore discouraging them to embrace more employment? Or should we provide certain incentives to encourage the young ones in the community to work? Should we provide certain reliefs on their payroll taxes, for instance, for certain age group to encourage them to take part in the formal sector of the community? But also, I think there's also a need to revisit policy around the investment in skills, technology, and infrastructure. Because if you have the right infrastructure that supports the businesses, then eventually you're going to have ease movement of goods and services and then grow the trade within the country.
Okay. Now, I'm quite sure you've had time to review the budget estimate and the presentations that have been done by different ministries. I would like to have some insights from you. What is your view about the government's plan? Do you think it is bold enough? Are you confident that the 6% growth in GDP is going to be achieved? What are your views about the budget?
I think generally, I think it's a bold budget. It has very high aspirations, but again, I think, to my point, if we are to really achieve that, there are things that we would need to do. If we say we need to be self-reliant and to have that budget funded by about 74% from local sources, what are we doing to grow the local market, the domestic market? And then what are we doing to also encourage, say, export of goods as opposed to significantly relying on imports? The budget is a 1-year period, the one that you're referring to, but I think there are measures that can be taken as an immediate solution. There are some immediate measures that can be taken, but there are measures that are also long-term measures that will eventually take us through the achievement of the Vision 2050.
And your views about the budget?
More or less the same views, but I think the only challenge that I see is that we're talking about 74% in terms of funding internally, and probably just need to have a mechanism, corrective mechanism to say what if that does not happen and what does that mean to the budget. So it might means that definitely the government needs to be very clear in terms of the spending that they are doing to ensure that they don't have wasteful spending and every dollar is accounted for in terms of the specific expenditure that is incurred for. So I think that for me will be key. And again, investors, trying to bring them in as much as possible to be able to fund more, to invest more, and that to be able to now drive that vision. And again, you look at it from employment creation, product creation in terms of exports and all that. So that could be quite a bit of something to look for.
Okay, and yes, your quick views, less than 1% is from foreign aid and donations, which is quite a leap for the Tanzanian government. We are looking at an area where all the development partners are now prioritizing their own domestic matters. So what are your views about Tanzania being able to sustain this level of fiscal, not being dependent on any donors to support the budget? We're now at $600 million for 2026-2027, most likely to go down further and further. So what about sustainability of that?
I think going back to my point in terms of do we have corrective actions in terms of if you don't meet it, what should be the actions that would not be able to ensure that we meet that budget? And I think, as I've said earlier, every amount should be accounted for in terms that we don't have wasteful spending and ensure whatever funding that we're having from the local sources, whether from tax or non-tax revenue, is actually put into the respective bucket and ensure that is done. And again, I think we need to look at from an investment point of view, the industrialization point of view, and how are we putting that in terms of collection. So I think for me, it's a bold budget. Most of the funding coming internally, quite a big ask for the government to do, quite a big ask for the local Tanzanian to do, so that at the end of the day, we can be able to meet that budget. Yes, we do have tensions across the globe. Tanzania is not an island, so we do expect there might be challenges in terms of reaching to that point, but I think provided the government had a vision that we should be able to meet this particular budget, let's aim to ensure that we support the government as the aim to reach that particular budget as local Tanzanians.
Well, thank you for this discussion. We're looking forward to June 11th when the Finance Ministry presents formally the budget in Parliament. You were with me, Mpoki Thompson, for the Citizen Digital. We were discussing Tanzania's fiscal budget for the year 2026-2027. What are the implications for the everyday Tanzanian, but also the private sector and global investors? Until next time, that is a wrap.